Are you feeling stuck when it comes to your chess improvement? Well, one of the key ways you get better at chess is by mastering your endgame technique. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do this so you can become a dangerous chess player. We'll cover it in 3 parts so you can walk away and start practicing and applying this to your games immediately. Let's get into it. Now, if you reached this position in a game, how confident would you be that you could win this game as white? 100% confident? 95%? 80? 50%? Where would you be? That essentially is what technique is. Technique is knowing how to finish the game off, either winning a winning endgame and finishing off with a win, or eking out a draw when you've been defending. And so that is the 0 to 100% spectrum is a really good way of looking at it. That's how I conceptualize it in my head. I think it's very effective because it highlights the outcome that we want. We want to get as close to 100% confidence or 100% probability that we can convert a winning endgame into a win every time. 100% of the time, 60% of the time, every time, as the old Anchorman quote is. Jokes aside, how do we do that? We do that through practice and mastering the common endgames. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a few examples of endgames that you'd have to pretty much master and the steps that you'd need to take so that you can understand how to practice correctly. Firstly, before we move on, if you guys don't know how to convert this, it's essentially you got to move your king up the board and using your king and your rook, support this pawn to become a queen. That rook, the black rook, then has to sacrifice itself, and then you sweep up the game and win with your extra rook. Bearing in mind, just don't lose these pawns, and then allow black to make a queen of their own. So there's traps in every position. It's not always clear cut, but that's essentially what the way to win this game is. If you couldn't figure it out and were curious. So when it comes to practice, if you are more on the beginner side, which means you're closer to that 0% side, you want to start with the absolute basics. So could you win this? This is the bread and butter of every chess game because inevitably you'll either end up with a queen up at the end, or you'll be a pawn up and then you convert that into a queen and then you're back into this position. So knowing how to checkmate a king with a queen and a king is essential. Once you master that, master it doing it with the rook as well. So again, we're doing the basic checkmates. This is step 1. 2 bishops versus a king. Can you checkmate the king every time? The other ones like bishop and knight versus king, there's less common checkmate patterns, but essentially these 2, queen and rook, and 2 bishops you want to master. After that, you go back a step, which is we don't have a queen yet, but we have a pawn. So king-pawn endgames. How can we convert this? So now we're starting to get into that sort of 20-30% range of endgame technique where we start getting confident converting king and pawn endgames. Fun fact, if anyone knew about this position, there's only actually one winning move for white, and that is king to e4. Every other move is actually a draw, despite white being pawn up. But that is what I mean by in-game techniques. A more advanced person will recognize that king e4 wins the opposition against black's king, which is the opposition is a technical concept of just when the kings sort of cut each other off. You want your king to cut the other king off, not the other way around. And so, yeah, that's essentially the only winning move there. Likewise, in this example, someone who has better in-game technique will recognize that in this position, there are 3 legal moves for black. It's black to move. 2 of them lose the game on the spot, and there's only 1 move that draws the game for black. Advanced players or players who have seen this position before and know it and have good technique will immediately recognize that moving the king to e8 is the only option to save the game, because after the king shuffles around, e7 check, the king moves here, and now it's white's move and white has to come here. If he goes anywhere else, black just takes the pawn. So here, and it's stalemate. So that's how black saves this position. Likewise, as white, you want to make sure that if you've got the pawn advantage, you don't want to be getting into a position where you end up drawing the game accidentally, which shows poor endgame technique. Last but not least, for practice, as you master the basics, you want to start adding pieces to the board. And this is where you plug it into chess.com analysis, and either endgames that you have played in your games, you want to play them out a few times to really get to the essence of the position, or just set up some random positions and try to win them. So in this case, white has a winning advantage because he's got two connected passed pawns here, but it's actually not a straightforward win, so it will require some good play by white, some good understanding of endgames, and this is where you practice these games, practice these endgames, you get more and more confident that when you get into a position like this in a real game, you can win the game. You can see the game through to a win. This brings us to the third point, which is strategy. More specifically, how can we plan for the end game in the middle game? And this is how we can actually see, 30 plus moves ahead, not by calculating, but by creating a position where we move the end game, we move the middle game rather, we drive it to an end game that we know we are going to be comfortable in converting to a win, where we have good technique and we're close to that 100% confidence, 100% probability that we can convert this into a win. So if we go back to this position, this was once a middle game, and white knew that, okay, I know I can trade my pieces correctly down into a position where the end game is winning for me and I'm confident that I can win it. So to illustrate this concept, we're going to look at a pretty famous game. It's one of my favorite games. I think it's very instructive. It's Frank Marshall as white versus Jose Capablanca, former world champion from Cuba, as black. And it's a middle game where it's equal material. Both sides have a light squared bishop. So how does Capablanca win this as black? Now, this is where the way I look at it is think of it in three categories. Or rather, three steps. Step one is, what is the pawn structure? Step two, what pieces do we want to keep on the board and which pieces do we want to trade off? And three, what are the weaknesses in my position that my opponent wants to exploit, and what are the weaknesses in my opponent's position that I want to exploit? So if you think about those three things, pawn structure, pieces how you're going to trade your pieces, and weaknesses in each position, you can create a plan in the middle game that drives towards the end game that you want, that you know you will win. So in this position, beginners won't see this necessarily. They'll just play anything, but more advanced players will recognize that, or like Capablanca recognized, he has an advantage of 3 pawns versus 2 on the queen side. So Capablanca, former world champion, knew that if he moves his pawns up and pushes them and then trades 2 pawns each on the queen side, he will end up with a single pawn versus 0 that he can march up the board and turn into a queen and win the game that way. Quite cool, right? It looks like a very equal middle game, but that's how powerful. When you understand end games, you can tailor your middle game plan to get into an end game that you're going to win. So I'll show you how Capablanca converted it into a win. For those who are interested, Capablanca knew in this position, again, the 3 pillars: pawn structure, pieces that we want to trade, and weaknesses. White's weaknesses would be this pawn on b2, which we can circle around with our rook or queen and attack. And Capablanca knows that the more pieces that get traded off, the better for him. So he's happy to trade that first pair of rooks. Let's just play out a few of these moves. Marshall wants to trade queens, and so here, Capablanca said, yep, I'm happy to trade queens because now my rook is going to come into your position. Check there, and a5. Rook c2, Marshall defends that weakness. It doesn't stop Capablanca trading the first set of pawns. And now let's pause here. In about 10-15 moves, Capablanca has reached a position where he's traded pieces down into an endgame that his pieces are now strong and white's are defensive. The pawn structure is such that black is on the verge of trading one more set of pawns and then having a passed pawn to promote into a queen. And what are the weaknesses? Well, again, black doesn't really have any weaknesses in his position to worry about, and white has to worry about this pawn, which ties up the rook to defend that pawn. So after a few more moves, you can kind of see how quickly Capablanca made the most of this. b3 here, rook c1, and then after bishop to d1, c3 won the bishop, because once that gets taken, b2 threatens to make a queen. So the rook has to take it, and after the rook takes back, let's play a couple more moves out. Bishop f5 kicks the rook off that c file, and Capablanca puts his rook behind the c pawn, and now, being a bishop up essentially, Capablanca is just going to coordinate his pieces, capture that c3 pawn, and just, again, it's just another step in the game. Now Capablanca has a piece more than white, and his endgame technique will allow him to convert this into a win. So there you have it. That is what endgame technique is. The outcome is we want to practice as much as possible to be comfortable in as many endgames so that we can more confidently say, yes, I'm 95% or 100% confident that I'll win this particular endgame. And then we want to find a plan in the middle game that we can drive towards a winning endgame, or an endgame where we know we've got a comfortable position that we can convert into a win, and see that through. Slowly grind the position down, push the position forward, and win the game that way. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a really key concept, and look, there's so many more key concepts in the other videos on my channel, so if you enjoyed this one, please consider subscribing, liking the video, all that good stuff.